Could you, I guess, just outline why you think that housing deregulation would have massive productivity gains?
Right. It's probably easiest to step back to immigration and then move over to housing.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, like the main benefit of immigration comes down to this. Right now, most people in the world live in countries with very low productivity, but there are some other countries with very high productivity. You might think the problem is the people, but we know that's wrong. And how do we know it? From immigration. Because from immigration, we've seen what happens when you go and you take a low-skilled worker from Haiti, say a shoe shine on the streets of Haiti, and you move them to Miami. Or you take a low-skilled Mexican farm worker and you move them to American farm. And basically overnight, what happens when you do this is that their earnings skyrocket. And like, well, how can their earnings skyrocket? And like, basic economics says it's got to be their productivity is much higher. For a farm worker, it's obvious that their productivity is higher because on that primitive farm, they're barely growing any food. And on a modern mechanized farm, they're growing a lot of food. For something like a shoe shine, it takes a little bit more reflection. Well, in what sense is he more productive in Miami than in Haiti? Until you remember, oh yeah, shoe shining is a service. The point of a service is to save customers time. When you save the time, when you save more valuable time, then you are actually being more productive. So that's the main economic case for immigration, is just that immigration restrictions prevent workers from doing what they naturally would do, which is move from places where their productivity is low to places where their productivity is high. It is transformative to the point where it is easy to go and multiply someone's productivity by a factor of 10 in a week. All right, so that's how immigration works. If this is different from almost any pro-immigration argument you ever heard, it's like, yeah, I know, but this one's the best. Right? It's one that is hard to get people on board with because it's like, well, gee, you mean that like it's good to have illiterate workers on our farms coming from other countries? Like, yeah, exactly. It's like, well, why? Because they produce way more food for humanity. And that is not just good for the migrant, it's good for everybody who eats, namely everybody. So this is the main benefit of immigration. It's just moving people from places where the productivity is low to places where the productivity is high. Right? With immigration, the gaps in wages are often so dramatic that there's little doubt that incredible numbers of people would move. Often surveys will say like 1 billion people would move, and there's some reasons to think that's too high, some reasons to think it's too low. Also depends upon over what time period, but still massive migration would happen if people were allowed to move. Now, when we think about housing, so within a country, normally there's no legal limitation on moving. So someone from rural Mississippi could move to the Bay Area today without getting any permission from anyone. And traditionally, this actually was very common in the United States and, of course, a lot of other countries, where there's some areas that are backwards, other areas that are advanced. And one of the main things that happens in these economies traditionally is that people from the backwards, low-wage places say, hey, I would like to get a large raise. I will go and move from Mississippi to California and get a better life for myself. This is something that traditionally happened, and you can see in the data that both low and high-skilled workers were moving out of low-wage areas of the U.S., especially the South, into high-wage areas. There's the famous giant move to California, where huge populations moved to California in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. The Grapes of Wrath would have you believe that this was just a disaster and didn't solve anything, but actually the real story is, for the most people that moved, it was fine. It's like, yeah, things were bad back home, and now I'm in California, and I have a much higher paid job, and the weather's really nice, and I'm happy. That was the normal thing that happened. Right, but anyway, like economically, why are people moving from one area to another? And the answer is that they get higher pay in that other area. Why do they get higher pay? Again, just like with an immigrant, because their productivity is higher, right? There's some areas that are more developed in, it could be technology, could be in management. Could just be that the land is better for agriculture. Like if there's some people farming the desert and there's some nice farmland that doesn't have a lot of people on it, then it makes sense to move the desert farmers to the fertile land farmers, or to the fertile land. All right. So anyway, if you take a look at the modern U.S., there's something pretty weird, which is that there's still very large gaps in measured productivity between the main regions of the U.S., but mobility has fallen a lot. And when the economists Ganong and Shoag went and looked at what was going on, they found out, here's what's actually happening. There's still quite a bit of movement of high-skilled people from low productivity areas to high productivity areas, But for lower skilled workers, it's actually going in reverse. Low skilled workers are actually leaving places like San Francisco where their wages are much higher and going to like places in Texas where their wages are lower. It's like, well, that's weird. Why would you move to places where wages are lower? And the answer is that there is this strange feature of the modern world, which is that, again, did not always work this way, which is that housing prices are so enormous in the high productivity areas that actually you need to be quite high skilled before the percentage wage gain exceeds the extra housing cost. So essentially, what workers are doing is they are focusing on their own standard of living, which is wages minus housing cost, minus some other things, of course, but minus cost of living. But the big difference in cost of living is just housing cost, right? So the reason why I do think that the story is right is that we first of all know that there are large differences in productivity. Second of all, we know that during the earlier period of much lighter regulation that there was not much difference in housing costs between high productivity and low productivity areas. So it stands to reason that if we could get housing costs back down to reasonable levels, then we would restore this standard feature of the economy, which is that workers of all skill levels have a tendency to move to places where their wages are higher. Not going to be as extreme as with immigration, because when you can multiply your wages by a factor of 10 by moving, then that's almost decides the issue. Like if Haitians could just move to the U.S. legally, probably Haiti would almost empty. It's just so dramatic in terms of what their living standards are like in Haiti versus here. Whereas it's just a matter of getting like a 20 or 30% gain, then some people say it sounds great. Other people say, I don't want it that bad. But still, the productivity differences between like the Bay Area and the rural South are big enough that it does still seem likely that there'd be a lot of mobility if the housing costs were reasonable in the high wage areas.